Well, hey, everyone. If you're watching this, that means that I am at home with COVID. And I decided to film my message to show at church just to have a backup plan just in case. Now, I'm hoping that I'm able to be there and this image or this video will never see the light of day because I am with you live and in person. But if not, please pray for me, pray for my family. We've gone this whole time without COVID, and it's finally made its way into our home. So please be praying for us. And here's the good thing about it, is now you don't have to laugh at my jokes. And I would never know. I'd never know. But hopefully you do. So with that in mind, there was a fledgling company in 1953 called the Rocket Chemical Company. And so what they decided to do is they decided to create an additive that could be used for rust prevention as well as a degreaser. And so they got into the chemical lab and they started working, creating formulas, putting things together, and attempting and trying things. And finally what happened is they got to a point where they finally had a breakthrough. They finally had a success. And here's the thing, is it took them 40 times to create this water displacement formula. 40 times to create this water displacement formula. So for some of you, you may know what I'm alluding to. For others of you, you may be like, what? Wait, what? But here it is. Here is what they created. And you might have it in your home. WD-40 stands for water displacement 40. Water displacement 40. And so what they did is they put it right on the bottle, right in the name. It took us 40 attempts to get this right. And I love that. I love that this is what they did. This is the way that they handled it, is we are going to celebrate the fact that it took us 40 tries to try to get this right. We're in the middle of a series that we're doing called Made Brand New. Made Brand New. And here's the thing. In the process of becoming made brand new, we're going to fail. We're going to struggle. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have setbacks. We're going to wrestle. That's part of the process of growth and development. And so what we could do is we look at ourselves and we can say, man, I keep failing. But if we keep persevering, maybe on the 40th try, we may have a breakthrough. Maybe on the 400th try, we may have breakthrough. Maybe on the 4,000th try, we may have breakthrough. But I want to encourage you, don't give up on yourself because God's not going to give up on you. God's not going to give up on you. And so that's why we've been doing this series. Hopefully, as a result of this series, what it will do is it will cause you to look at those areas of your life that you see are damaged, that you see where you have a struggle. And I think sometimes, again, what we do is we disqualify ourselves from God's presence, from God's blessing, because all we do is we look at our struggle. All we do is we look at our wrestles. All we do is we look at our setbacks. And what God does is goes, no. What I do is I look at you and I see what I created. I see who I created. I see your potential. I see who you could be. And that's the reason why I gave my son to die on the cross so that you can be forgiven and overcome your struggles. And so what we've been doing over the course of this series is we've been looking at the example of a guy who was damaged and how he found acceptance. So we'll go ahead and we'll just dive into the major players of our story. So we said that, and remember I said that one of the things that we've been doing over the course of this series is I like to, when I'm reading the Bible, I like to try to picture myself like watching a movie. And so with this, I picture like Samuel L. Jackson as Saul, like the first king of Israel. And when he started out, he had God's blessing. But then he began to just make some really dumb decisions. And eventually, he lost God's presence on him because of the choices that he made. And Saul had a son named Jonathan, and of course we use Idris. Now I'm going to tell you, eventually this series is going to be done, and you will no longer have Idris each week. You'll just be stuck with Kendris. Again, I know. Are you laughing? I don't know. But the idea is Jonathan. Jonathan was Saul's son, and Jonathan recognized that when it came to his dad, that things were different. He didn't have the presence of God in his life anymore. And Jonathan had a friend named David. And they were best friends. They were deeply connected with one another. They were the best of friends. And Jonathan was able to recognize that there was something unique about David and about his life. And so Jonathan said in an experience that they had together, Jonathan said, hey, David, I need you to do me a favor. And that is, if anything happens to me or my dad, if anything happens to either one of us, would you take care of my family? Would you take care of my family? And so now we fast forward 2 years later. And David decides to follow through on his promise. And so he asked this question in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 3. Then the king then asked them, is anyone alive from Saul's family? If so, I want to show God's kindness to them. Ziba replied, yes, one of Jonathan's sons is still alive. He is crippled in both feet. He is crippled in both feet. So in this, what we talked about is being able to see a picture. And so we use this picture to represent Mephibosheth. That was the name of Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth, of course, is in a wheelchair. So, of course, we use Professor X in a wheelchair as well to give us a picture of what's going on. But David decides, you know what? I want to show God's kindness to one of Saul's family, to Jonathan's family. Now, here's the thing that's really interesting, is when we look at Mephibosheth, and we talked about this a little bit more last week, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through it today. If you missed last week at all, I want to encourage you, go back and watch the live stream replay. You can find that on our website. Watch the live stream replay. You can either watch a replay of the entire service or a replay of just the message. It's up to you. But you can go back and you can watch that. But with that in mind, when we look at Mephibosheth, it is obvious that Mephibosheth struggled with his identity. See, Ziba talked about him being crippled in both feet, and that is what Mephibosheth saw as well. He saw himself as being unworthy. Matter of fact, this is the way that Mephibosheth put it. He said, in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 8, Mephibosheth bowed respectfully and exclaimed, who is your servant that you should show such kindness to a dead dog like me? To a dead dog like me. So like I said, we dug into that a lot more last week. But what we can see is here is a guy that is also not able to see beyond his damage as well. And one of the things I love that David does is David never addresses his statement. Never. He never addresses his statement. What David does is he just gives an order. And he says this in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verses 9 and 10. It says, then the king summoned Saul's servant Ziba and said, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and servants are to farm the land for him to produce food for your master's household. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, will eat at my table. Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And so what we see here is we see that he's invited to the table. He's invited to the table, and he begins to connect and build this relationship. And I love this. What David does is he never addresses Mephibosheth's doubt. He never addresses them. But here's what he does, is he says, just come eat at my table. Eat at my table. Eat at my table. Why? Because if you want to change and you want to quiet the voice of your damage, eat at the king's table. Our damaged voices are loud. They're loud. And if we want to begin to drown them out and begin to see ourselves as God sees us, the best way to do that is to spend time at the king's table. That's the best way to do that. And so with that in mind, that's why I want to encourage you, spend time in Scripture. Make sure you're reading Scripture. And one of the things that we do is for every single one of our messages, if you use the Bible app to follow along in our message, and every single one of our message, we also include a reading plan at the end of the message that you can utilize. It relates to the message that week, and it'll help you get started with spending time in Scripture. But spend time in Scripture so that way you can hear God's voice. Spend time in prayer so that way you can begin to deeply connect with Him. Spend time in church on a regular basis. That way you can come and be encouraged and uplifted by the messages that we speak. Make sure that you are involved in serving others. There's something about serving others that when you do so, when you utilize your gifts, your talents, your abilities, when you begin to utilize those for God, it changes everything, and it changes the way that you see yourself. If you want to see yourself differently, it is vital that you make a commitment to spend time at the King's table. To spend time at the King's table, eating with him, connecting with him. So I talked about the way that I kind of see the stories of the Bible as a movie. So I want to take you on a journey with me. So just utilize your imagination. Imagine that we're watching a movie. And as we're watching the movie, the drone is flying over, and you see this field underneath you. And then you begin to hear the voice of laughter, and it's a little boy's laughter. And as the drone continues to fly over, you begin to see Mephibosheth, and he's running in the fields. Maybe he's taking his hand and he's rubbing them along the weeds, or he's laughing with his friends and having a good time. He's doing things that boys do with their friends as far as just wrestling and just having a really great time. He's doing all of those elements. But then, in every movie, there's a plot twist. There's that initial plot twist when something goes bad, when something happens. And basically what happens with Mephibosheth is that his grandfather, Saul, and his dad die. They die in battle. So all of a sudden, an alarm is sounded in Saul's house, in his grandfather's house, that basically says, we must evacuate because we have no idea what's going to happen to us. And so everyone decides to evacuate. And as they're evacuating, it says that Mephibosheth, his nanny, was holding him. And as she was holding him, she tripped and fell, and he was crippled as a result of what she did. And so now we see that we're starting to hit the low point of the movie where there's challenges. And one of the things I love, like in all the Marvel movies, there's always a character that goes through like the identity struggle and trying to figure out who they are. And so this is where Mephibosheth finds himself. Not only that, we see him that before he was at the palace, and maybe with that there's a pan up and we saw a palace. But now when we look, he's in Lodabar. And if you guys remember what we said about Lodabar literally means nothing. He's at the place of nothing. It means no pasture. In other words, there's no growth. There's no development. And so he finds himself at the lowest place in his life. And for some of you who were damaged, when we find ourselves at the lowest place in our lives, you know what that damage does? Is it begins to speak into the lowest place of our lives, and we begin to see ourselves as lower in that place. And I think that's what happened with Mephibosheth. That's why he struggled with his identity and who he was. I think that's why he struggled with himself. And then what happens is now everything begins to turn, and so now we're starting to curve up, and he's invited to go and meet with David. And now things are turned around. Now he's eating at the king's table, and things are great. And they all lived happily ever after. Actually, no. They didn't. Don't you hate those movies where you're excited, the characters overcome his challenges, and then, boom, they drag you down the wormhole again. They do. But you know what the truth is? That's what real life is like. Real life isn't always fairy tale endings and happy endings and things working out well. Sometimes you start to grow and develop and change and try to become a better you. And maybe things around you get worse. Matter of fact, here's my main point for the message today. And it's simply this, is that when it comes to being able to overcome and change and develop in our lives, sometimes what happens is restoration is always followed by temptation and opposition. Sorry, my phone turned off, so I'm trying to turn my phone back on. So restoration is always followed by temptation and opposition. That's the reality when it comes to the greatest challenges in our lives. It is always that way. It's always that way. When you're trying to get your life together, when you're trying to make your life right, you go through challenges. You go through opposition. Matter of fact, I love what Denzel Washington had to say. He put it this way. He says, when the devil ignores you, then you know you're doing something wrong. The devil goes, oh no, leave him alone. He's my favorite. Conversely, when the devil comes at you, maybe it's because you're trying to do something right. When you're in your damage and you're doing nothing with your life, the enemy has no worry about you whatsoever, no concern about you whatsoever. But when you begin to deal with the damaged areas of your life, then what happens is Satan says, oh no, he's going to find purpose. She's going to overcome. He's going to find position. She's going to grow and develop. And all of a sudden now you become a threat to Satan and what Satan desires to do. And so what he does is he brings opposition and temptation into your life. And have you noticed that whenever you try to change or grow or develop, become a better version of yourself, opposition and temptation always comes. And so for the rest of this message, what we're going to talk about is Mephibosheth's doubt, his challenge, his opposition. So I want to introduce another player to our movie, and that is this guy, Peter Pettigrew. Now, if you are familiar with Harry Potter, you know who Peter Pettigrew is. Basically, he was a friend of Harry's dad and his family, and they had a group of people that were all together. And so Voldemort comes in, and Voldemort begins to threaten this group of people, and so they go into hiding. Well, Peter Pettigrew, he's also known as Wormtail. He reveals where they are, and the result of that is Harry's dad is killed, Harry's mom is killed, and that's where Harry gets the lightning bolt mark on his head. But as a result of this betrayal, so why do we have this guy? Because I think that's Ziba. And we're going to spend the rest of our message talking about Ziba. And I love that this character is also known as Wormtail. And when you see Ziba, you think, oh man, he fits the bill. He is a Wormtail as well. So again, it goes back to 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 3. Then the king asked him, is anyone alive from Saul's family? If so, I want to show God's kindness to them. Ziba replied, yes, one of Jonathan's sons is still alive. He is crippled in both feet. Now, here's the thing with this, is what Ziba does is he introduces Jonathan by his damage. And here's the reason why. Is back in biblical times, for people who were crippled or who were physically challenged in some way, they were seen as less than. And I think what Ziba thought is by saying, hey, there's this guy, but he's crippled. I think that he thought David would go, oh, okay, well, hey, I'll bless you. I'll bless you. I'll give you I will show you my kindness in this way. I think Ziba thought that it would come to him and that he would benefit from this. I think he thought he would benefit from it. And as we begin to dig further into the story, what we'll see is Ziba becomes more and more bitter. That's why I think Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15 is perfect for us. It says, look after each other so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many. No poisonous root of bitterness. Because that's what happens. Ziba saw himself as better than David. And why did he become bitter? Because here's what happens. It says in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 10, you, talking to Ziba, you and your sons and servants are to farm the land for him. So remember, I think he saw Mephibosheth as less than. And now, you want me to work for him? You want me to work? Isn't it interesting how life happens that way? But yes, you want me to work for him? So you are to farm the land for him to produce food for your master's household. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, will eat at my table. Will eat at my table. Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Had 15 sons and 20 servants. So as we begin to look at what's happening, and isn't it interesting? I've always thought it ironic in that way, that sometimes people that hate others the most tend to have to be in a position where they have to serve them. It's just ironic in that way. It's almost like, God kind of being like, I'll show you, buddy. I'll show you, buddy. You hate him? Look, I'll show you. You're going to work for him. It's very interesting in that way. But Ziba found himself in this position now where he had to work for David in his relationship with him. So again, restoration is always followed by opposition and temptation. It's always followed by opposition and temptation. So it goes on to say in verse 11, Ziba replied, and I can see this, yes, my lord the king, I am your servant. I will do all that you have commanded. Because I don't see him being very excited about it. But it says, and from that time on, Mephibosheth ate regularly at David's table, like one of the king's own sons. One of the king's own sons. And again, I love that. I love that. So I want to encourage you, no matter what your challenge, if you are going to be able to overcome that opposition and that temptation when it comes, again, that's why it's so important. Eat at the king's table. Why? And begin to look at yourself. What is it that stops me from eating at the king's table? What habits do I need to break? What mindsets do I need to change? What attitudes do I need to overcome? What habits do I need to break? Begin to look at yourself and ask yourself, what is it that keeps me from eating at the king's table on a regular basis? Here's the truth. For many of us, we don't grow because we only eat at the king's table once a week. And that's on Sundays. That's not enough to change your life. It's not. You need to be daily spending time with God and connecting with him if your life is going to change and grow. So what do you need to do to alter your life? Because I can tell you now, opposition and temptation are going to come. They're going to come. Now, here's the thing that's really interesting as well. Ziba misses the whole point. Now just think about what happened with Ziba, is that he now works for Mephibosheth. He has job security for the rest of his life. Not only does he, but his family has job security for the rest of Mephibosheth's life. And if they were to do this well and working for the king, who knows what opportunities this would have opened for them. But instead, you know how that happens? Is sometimes we look a gift horse in the mouth and all we smell is bad breath. We do that sometimes. We do that sometimes. That here's this incredible opportunity that has been dropped in our laps for growth and for development and for change and to become, again, a better version of ourselves. Here's an incredible opportunity for that, yet here we are in this position. Why? Because of the simple fact that we look at this opportunity that we've been given, and all we see are trials, all we see are hardships, all we see are problems. We don't see how it can be a blessing. So that's what Ziba wrestled with. And we know that eventually Ziba, that he has this mindset where, again, I think he thinks he's better than Mephibosheth. And we'll talk about why in a minute. But what Ziba's doing is he's buying his time. He's just kind of waiting. And suddenly the opportunity presents itself. So David has a son named Absalom that decides to do a hostile takeover of David's kingdom. And so with that in mind, what David does is David knows, man, if I fought my son, I'd mop him. Like, he's like, I just love my son too much. If he wants the kingdom, he can have it. So David runs. And while he's on the run, this is what happens. It says in 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1, when David had gone a little beyond the summit of Mount Olives, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, was waiting there for him. So Ziba's waiting there for him. What is he waiting for? It says he had 2 donkeys loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 bunches of summer fruit, and a wineskin full of wine. And it goes on. What are these for? The king asked Ziba. Ziba replied, the donkeys are for the king's people to ride on, and the bread and summer fruit are for the young men to eat. The wine is for those who become exhausted in the wilderness. So we're looking at this, and Ziba's like, here it is. So this is Ziba's opportunity. Like, this is our chance. So I'm going to come up, and I'm going to be the hero. So David, here you go. Here's a couple of donkeys. Ride them. That's for you to ride. And I know you're hungry. Here's some food. Here's some refreshing food for you to be able to eat. And also for those of you who are tired, here's some wine for you to revitalize yourself as well. And so Ziba, he puts himself in the good graces of David. But then it goes on and it asks this question. It says, and where is Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson? The king asked him. He stayed in Jerusalem, Ziba replied. He said, today I will get back the kingdom of my grandfather, Saul. In that case, the king told Ziba, I give you everything Mephibosheth owns. I bow before you, Ziba replied. May I always be pleasing to you, my lord, the king. May I always be pleasing to you, my lord, the king. So just think about that. Here's Mephibosheth. Dude, man, I took care of you. You ate at my table. I treated you as one of my sons. And this is the things I get? This is how you treat me? So wouldn't you be upset? Wouldn't you be upset if that's what happens, is that you open yourself up to trust this person, to allow them to come in, to allow them to be part of your family, and they turn on you this way? So David's like, fine. If that's what Mephibosheth's going to do, Ziba, you can have it all. You can have it all. So things go along, time goes on. Eventually, Absalom is killed by one of King's men, or one of David's men. And David goes through the process. He mourns Absalom, and then he works his way back into Jerusalem. And when he gets back to Jerusalem, here's what happens. He runs into Mephibosheth, and here's what happens. Now Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, came down from Jerusalem to meet the king. He had not cared for his feet, trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes since the day the king left Jerusalem. Now, there are two thoughts on this, of him not taking care of himself, of being so unkempt. The first thought is, once David left, Ziba didn't have to pretend anymore. So Ziba's like, buddy, you're on your own. Good luck with that, pal. You're on your own. That's one possibility. The other possibility, which I do love, it says that Mephibosheth was so loyal to David that although he couldn't go with David, he decided, I would not take any luxuries or have anything that David would not have. So if David suffers, I'm going to suffer too. So I love that perspective. It shows that he was severely loyal to David. But their conversation goes on. But I do want to remind us of this. Restoration is always followed by temptation and opposition. And now we're about to see the opposition that happened with Mephibosheth. And it goes on, and it says in chapter 19, verse 25, well, why didn't you come with me, Mephibosheth? The king asked. Mephibosheth replied, my lord the king, my servant Ziba deceived me. I told him, saddle my donkey so I can go with the king, for as you know, I am crippled. Ziba has slandered me by saying that I refuse to come. But I know that my lord the king is like an angel of God, so do what you think is best. All my relatives and I could only expect death from you, my lord. But instead, you have honored me by allowing me to eat at your own table. What more can I ask? What more can I ask? So Mephibosheth, what he does is, again, he reminds David, I was there. I wanted to go. But Ziba tricked me. He tricked me. And so now you kind of see where this opposition came in. Imagine that you're Mephibosheth, and you want to go with David to support David, to be there with him because he was there for you. And now here's this guy that tricks you. Again, restoration is always followed by opposition and temptation. And it goes on to say this. You said enough, David replied. I've decided that you and Ziba will divide your land equally between you. Did you catch that? Wait. Let me wrap my mind around this. Ziba lies, cheats, deceives, and yet, David, you are giving him half of my stuff? That's not fair. That's not fair. And let me tell you, this is so important. Sometimes when you're going through your restoration process, there will be challenges that you will face. And here's the truth. The outcome won't be fair. And you have to decide then, will I continue to pursue restoration, or will I give up? Because what matters? What does it matter? I try to be a better version of myself. I try to stop drinking. I try to grow and try to change and try to develop. And now I have these people from my past that won't let me grow and let me change. And they remind me of how messed up I used to be. And as a matter of fact, they say things like, oh, you think you're better than I am now? Because look at you, you're trying to get yourself together. You just think you know how people can be that way, right? And then they benefit from it. they grow. He gets half of my stuff. That's not fair. And again, so here's what you're going to have to decide. What's more important? Your equality or your restoration? Fairness or your restoration? It's really important. It's really important. It goes on. And Mephibosheth says this. He says, give him all of it. wait. No, that blows my mind too. He's about to give Ziba half of it. And Mephibosheth says, give him all of it. Give him all of it. Mephibosheth said, I am content just to have you safely back. Again, my lord, the king. I am content just to have you back safely. You know what he's saying is, I don't need all that stuff. Give it to him. I don't need that, David, as long as I have you. As long as I have you. So that's the thing that you have to decide. And we're going to dig into this more next week. We're going to look at how do we get to that place? How do we get to that place where we're able to be like Mephibosheth? That even if I'm in this position where things are not fair, how do I get to that place where I am able to say, well, Jesus, I will just focus on what's important, on what's more important. I will just focus on that. So we're going to dig into that next week. But just think about that. Mephibosheth says, I don't need all that. And that's the thing that we have to decide when it comes to our restoration. Is God really enough? Is God really enough? It's easy to say God is enough when I have it all. It's easy to say. But can I really say it and mean it when I'm trying to be restored and I lose? Is he really enough? Is he really enough? Or will you just focus on what's unfair? Or will you just focus on what's unfair? Which brings us to our last point, which is this. When we focus on what's most important, our healing is not undermined by unfairness. Our healing is not undermined by unfairness. Just because you're healing doesn't mean that everything's going to work out. Just because you're healing doesn't mean that your relationships are going to heal and renew. Just because you're healing doesn't mean, we can go through a list that you're going to be okay financially. Just because, we can go through the list of results that we're hoping to happen because we're healing. And it's not. It's not a guarantee. Matter of fact, you can start healing and it gets worse. It gets worse, but what's more important? That's the thing that you have to decide. That's what we're going to dig into next week. Can you persevere when things are unfair? Father, I thank you for this morning. I just pray that you would use this as an opportunity to speak to the lives of those who are here, who are watching. Father, I just pray that you would allow your presence just to be made known. And that, Lord, you would soften our hearts. Father, I know when things are unfair, it is so difficult to focus on what it is that really matters. But I pray that we're able to see beyond our pain, to see you, and embrace your heart for us. And all this we ask in your name.